Hello, everybody. I am Laurel Marr, and this is my friend and colleague, Kathy Trossi. We work at Grace Episcopal Church in Keswick, Virginia, and Kathy knows that I am a death doula, and I know from conversations with Kathy that she's been a caregiver to her mother when she had dementia, and she's also a caregiver to her husband who has the beginning stages of dementia. So I've asked her to do an interview with me to talk a little bit about what it means to be a caregiver for a parent, a spouse, or a loved one with memory loss. So thank you, Kathy. I'm very glad that you're doing this with me. One of the first questions that I have for you is, in the onset of memory loss, what do you notice and what do you do?
Well, at the very beginning, most of the time you don't realize what's happening because you're involved in day-to-day life and you don't really think about things and patterns and all until they've kind of occurred. It is it's very hard in the beginning because there'll just be little things that will happen and it'll kind of strike you as odd, and you'll think, that's just kind of weird. And then all of a sudden, you start to see things happening over and over again. It might be the same story that's being told multiple times, which is what my mother would do. She'd tell us the same story over and over and over again. Sometimes she would embellish those stories, but they would all be basically iterations of the same thing. With my husband, there would be, he would make little comments, and then I would start to hear those same little comments happening day after day after day. Same kinds of observations. Now he'll say things like, that happens. I see that deer every single day at this exact time, or, that cat did, the same thing yesterday at exactly the same time. And so you start to see patterns and things. But it's not just that. Sometimes they start to pay less attention to their own well-being. Might be nutrition, it might be hygiene, it might be the clothes they wear. Just they start to kind of get out of sync with their normal patterns, and then you start to kind of look back over time and realize that the patterns have changed. And then you start to kind of document and start to kind of look at that, because you can't really go to seek assistance, and you do want to at some point in time, but you really can't until you see those patterns and trends. And everybody's different. Everybody's going to, these things are going to happen differently for everybody. But your loved one better than anybody else. You've known them for, if it's your parent, you've known them for your whole life. If it's your spouse, you've known them for any period of time, depending on how long you've been married. But you begin to see things that are different. A lot of times you'll hear people, oh, I lost my keys, I must be, losing my memory. It's like, well, when you start to think your keys are your telephone, or you think the telephone is your TV remote, or you look at a cell phone, and you have no clue how to use it, or you've built a house, but you look at a hammer and you don't know how to use it. Things are happening to that person, and it's like everything is so confused and so jumbled that it's like extremely overwhelming, and it's very frustrating for the person. So you start to see the person starting to get angry. And sometimes it's directed at you, the caregiver, or the people, the family, or whoever's around, but it's not meant that way. The person's angry at themselves because they can't figure it out. They don't know what to do. But once patterns and trends, you start to see them, I recommend documenting them because it kind of helps keep it fresh in your mind, and then you can begin to maybe categorize into, I'm seeing these pattern changes in terms of behavior, I'm seeing these pattern changes in terms of nutrition, I'm seeing these patterns in terms of communication, in terms of being able to respond to people when they ask questions, and you can kind of just categorize them, because then the more information you have when you go to seek medical attention to be able to support medically, neurologically, what's going on, it helps the physician to be able to know that, because you end up being the voice for that person.
Mhm.
Usually by the time, unless there's been some catastrophic event or something that's put you in the hospital, that, they begin to see some things, before before it gets to this point. Usually by the time you are able to get, or at least it's been in my experience, the time when you're able to get the support, the person is not able to really voice for themselves anymore, or accurately.
Right.
Anyway. And so you've got to be there with them, to be able to present a more holistic picture. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And when it's like, who do you first speak with on your physician team? Do you start with a primary care and tell them the things that they're seeing, and they'll see you first, and then make a referral to a neurologist? Is that right?
That's been my experience, yes, because there are a variety of tests that can be done to be able to see what's going on in the brain and in your neurological system. Because sometimes actually what you're seeing is a symptom of something else, and it really isn't dementia. There are other medical issues that are going on that are causing this to happen, and it's temporary. It may or may not be the onset of dementia, and you need a physician to be able to tease all that and know that. But regardless, yes, start with your primary care physician, and then they'll make referrals from that point to be able to figure out what's going on. I know in my mother's case, towards the latter part of her life, she had a urinary tract infection. We did not know that. And urinary tract infections combined with not having enough water, not being hydrated enough, can cause you to not be able to do some of the things that you used to be able to do. And at one point we thought we were trying very hard to keep her in our home and not have to go to a nursing home. But at one point my sister and I started looking at nursing homes seriously, because we thought it was getting to the point where I wasn't going to be able to handle her anymore at home. And come to find out, she had some medical issues going on that once we treated those, she got back to her. She wasn't back where, she started before all of this path started, but she got back to the point where we were able to manage her at home again. So she wasn't ready for a nursing home. So you can't jump to conclusions about what's going on. You definitely need your medical team around with you.
That's really important. That's a great point. So speaking of your sister, I know you also have children, and how do things progress, and how does it impact the relationships with other people in the family as someone's memory loss continues to advance?
It has a huge impact on everybody around the person, everybody. At first, there's, I know my husband kept saying to me when my mother was, progressively falling backwards, he would say to me, she's manipulating you, that's, she knows what she's saying, she knows what she's doing, she just wants you to be able to help her. And I knew that wasn't the case, but that was his reaction to it, because he was having a hard time transitioning to seeing that, and he had just not experienced that before. So you have to understand that everybody is impacted differently, and it's to get everybody in that person's circle to be able to get to the same point of being able to accept, acknowledge, not deny that it's going on, whatever, and to be able to manage it. I can speak for myself. Once the person's going to be angry at first, they're going to be frustrated, and then they're going to turn it to themselves. They're going to turn it to everybody around you, but you can't take it personally. You have to just realize that this is an angst that the person's going through. I can imagine myself when I get to this point in my life, I'm going to be frustrated because I can't figure this out. I don't do it. I can't. My mother was a beautiful seamstress, and when she got to the point where just having the sewing machine in her room was just too anxiety producing for her, that's when we took it down. But for a long time, when she moved in with us, the sewing machine was there because it gave her comfort. It made her feel like, and she was able to do some things with it. But as that kind of progressed, she got agitated. But you have to look for the signs. You have to know the person, and you have to let them vent, let them get frustrated, and then help to redirect them and try to get them engaged in something that they can do and something to focus on that makes them happy again, and then they're able to kind of deal with that. But with when you're in a relationship, I found that in the relationship with my mother, it was much harder than with my husband, it's much harder than with my mother. Because with your spouse, all of a sudden you're in a whole different world. All of a sudden you're a spouse and you're married to this person, but all of a sudden you're their caregiver. It's very, very, very different. And for the person who's accepting the care, it's hard for them to accept it as well. And they're gonna push back, and they're gonna get angry, and things are gonna get tense. And when things get tense in your marriage and you can't talk about things, you can't communicate the way that you used to be able to communicate, all of a sudden, with my mother, I could always go to my husband and we could talk about things, and we could kind of ground each other and put things in perspective. When your spouse is in that position, I don't want to go to my children with these things. I don't want to burden them with these things. It's not, they are aware of what's going on with their father, and they are aware of all these issues, but they're just things you don't talk about with your children. I don't want them to see their father in a different light than they've always known him to be, and they've got to come to grips with it on their own. But it's very, very different.
Well, it sounds to me that you being the caregiver, you have needs that need to be met. And if when your mother was the one you're caring for, you had your husband. Now, your husband's not able to provide that support because you're supporting him, and you know that's too much for your children. So what do you do? What can you do? Find other women.
You rely on your friends and your family. And you know the people that you are closest to, that you feel like you can talk to, and that you're not burdening them, and that it's like we're there for each other, and that's what friends and family are for, to be able to support each other in these kinds of periods of time. I'm working part-time now because of that. I mean, it gives me a period of time that I can be me, and I can be around other people without having to be in a caregiving mode, and that helps me. It's part of my respite.
It's your self-care.
It's my self-care. So you have to do that. You find other things that you can do. I love to walk. I love to knit. I love to read books. You find other outlets, and you carve out and you make time for these things, while you also make time for caregiving. You have to do that. You have to take care of yourself.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's talk about this book. You told me about this book that you made for your mom. It's called A Treasury of Memories and Love, the story of Mary Almeida Smith Hartling, is written by her daughter, Catherine Hartling Trossi. So you shared with me very briefly about the impact that making this book had on you, your family, and your mother, and it even helped her have something to remember when she no longer could remember. So, can you share a little bit about the process of creating it and the positive impact? You said there were times that it didn't have a positive impact. Share a little bit about
Sure.
that.
Sure. This book really was, I hope I can talk about it without crying. This book really was very cathartic for me. I started working on it when my mother lived with us for 8 years, when she made the decision to move out of her home. And she'd fallen too many times. She had not hurt herself. She'd never broken a bone, but she had fallen once too many times. And she came to the realization that it wasn't safe for her to continue to live at home. And so she contacted my sister and I. And the last thing that my husband said to me as I was leaving the house to go there to meet her, "You tell your mother that she's going to come live with us because we take care of family." And she did. She lived with us for 8 years, and bless his heart, for because that doesn't always happen for the spouse to be accepting of that. But anyway, when she came to live with us, she had been telling the same stories every time I'd go see her. She'd tell the same stories over and over again, and I just, all of a sudden, we were playing cards one night, and she was talking the same things. And so I said, wait a minute, I'm going to get a pad of paper. I'm going to sit down and jot some of this stuff down. And I started trying to capture every time she would tell a story. I would try to capture that story, and then I would go put it into the computer. And as she would tell the stories other times, sometimes she would embellish a little bit more than other
Some
times.
of the pictures
And
what it looks like on the inside as you talk about that.
So I would just capture them. And at first I was just putting notes down. I wasn't trying to organize it in any way, shape, or form. I was just trying to put it together. We also, when she moved in, she brought all of her old photograph albums and things. And so we would go through those, and I would try to figure out at what point in time with some of these stories, some of these pictures were taken. And all of a sudden it just occurred to me one day after I had captured all these things that a good way to organize it would be, my mother lived a very eclectic life from the time that she was a child. And my father was in the military, and she moved around. She did a lot of things. She grew up during the Depression. I decided to take all of the stories and everything and put it into chapters that would be chapters of her life, periods of time where there were themes. And I went from, and I knew the last chapter would be the chapter where she died, and I couldn't write that chapter until the book was finished, but I started writing. And of course, as you can imagine, somebody with memory loss, their memory is going to be worse later on in their life. So they're going to remember things from when they were younger much better than the present
memories.
In fact, my mother didn't know who, she'd look at pictures of her husband and she wouldn't know who that was, and so going back, so the chapters that are the earlier chapters are longer chapters because there's more information in there. And I tried to, on her 90th birthday, we had a big, huge reception for her in her home church in the parish hall. And we invited people that were family, as well as people that had known my mother and my father over the years, even some dating back to the that they had known in the in the 1930s, 1940s. And so there were people from all walks of her life that were there. Probably about 50, 60, 70 people that day came in during the course of time to talk to her. And I had what I called memory jars in the middle of the table and asked people to jot down their favorite memory of being with my mother or whatever. And then after the event was over, I took all of these different memories and I sorted them into what point in her life people were talking about that. And I embellished and put into the chapters the information from the memory jar. So it included information that were her stories captured in her words, but also the words of other people from their perspective about things, that were going on. So I tried to weave a lot of things in and out. And then as she got to the point where she needed to have somebody with her during the day when I was working, because I was working full time during the majority of the time that she lived with us. And as I would write chapters, I would ask the caregiver that was with her that day to read and then have her edit it. Did I capture this right? Is there something that needs to be changed, whatever? And she really enjoyed that. She enjoyed being a part of that. And she loved the fact that I was writing this book. And it got to the point over time where, she would love doing that. And then it got to the point where she would read it and she would get tears in her eyes and she would say, did that really happen? Was that really me? I don't remember that happened, but I guess it did because it's written down. And then at the end, towards the very, very end, she got to the point where it got her upset. She almost got angry when we were reading it because she couldn't remember those things. She didn't recognize the pictures. She didn't know the people. Because none of that was in the forefront of her mind, and it really frustrated her. So that's when we stopped reading it. But anyway, after she died, that it probably took me maybe 6 months to finish it because I wanted to go back in and edit everything. But also that last chapter was very hard to write, and that chapter was all from my perspective, not from hers, because she wasn't there mentally at the time. And that was the hardest for me, but also when it finished, it was very cathartic because it helped me. You wouldn't recognize it from me talking right now because I'm crying and she's been passed on for 3 years, but I still get emotional thinking about it. And the nice part was the fact that I was glad that she lived with us for the last 8 years of her life because I got to know my mother from the perspective of she was a person. She was somebody who was born in the 1920s and lived through the Depression, started working on her own when she was 16 years old after she was, left college, and she made a life for herself. And after my father died, she lived alone for 17 years until she moved in with us. I mean, she lived, and every chapter of her life is just full of I understand myself better after getting to know my mother better.
Right.
But all of these are things you go through with somebody who has memory loss. You go through the angst and all. But the most important thing is that you have to grow with that person, and you don't want to argue with them. You don't want to try to change their perspective. That is their world.
Right.
Live in their world.
Live in their world.
And then you have a much better relationship. I'm going to tell a real quick story and then I'll stop. One of the stories that's in here, I call it, you're having a Queen of England kind of a day. And right now my husband can laugh about it because he knows what that phrase means. In another, 5 years, he might not know. But Queen of England kind of a day. I had a friend that I walked with when I was, we would go out for walking every day at lunchtime when I was working full time. And she was telling the story of when her mother had dementia and was living with her sister in Northern Virginia. And one day her mother is sitting in the living room and she gets up and she runs out to the porch, and Maggie's sister asked her where she was going. The Queen of England just walked by. I've got to go out there. And her sister's like, no, there's no Queen of England out there, just kind of dismissing her. My friend gets up, walks out on the porch with her mother. And she says, Mom, who are you seeing? The Queen of England. She just went by. And my friend just looks and she says, yeah, I guess she did. Well, she's gone now. You want to go back inside? So it's like you redirect them, but you
Right.
live in their world before you
Yeah.
redirect them. And it's like, so when I say, are you having a Queen of England kind of a day? It means kind of, are things kind of happening that aren't quite
Wow.
right? That,
It
it's
seems
like,
to me as the
you have to laugh.
yes,
You have
that's
to
what I was
enjoy
going to
it.
say. You have to laugh, but also, when you're a parent and you have children,
Mhm.
you play in their imaginary world a little bit.
Exactly.
You're
This
doing
is the
that
same thing.
again, but this
Mhm.
time you're the child doing it
Mhm.
with your parent.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow. Well, Kathy, thank you. Thank you for the time you spent with me outside of this interview, sharing this information. Thank you for offering to do an interview. And I know that this is going to be really helpful to everybody who gets to watch it.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes.